The first mistake the courtroom made was laughing before it knew the old man's name. Walter Harlan sat alone at the defense table in the Fairmont County Courthouse, 74 years old, white-haired, shoulders slightly bent beneath a faded brown jacket that looked older than half the people in the room. His shoes were polished, but not evenly. His tie was plain navy, tightened with a soldier's habit, not a lawyer's style. Beneath the table, close to his right foot, rested an old leather army bag with cracked seams and a brass buckle worn smooth by decades of use. No one cared about the bag. No one cared about the man. They saw the trembling hands, the weathered face, the slow way he rose when the bailiff called his name, and they decided the story before it began. Assistant District Attorney Ethan Pierce stood across from him in a tailored gray suit, 38 years old, sharp smile, sharper voice, the kind of man who had learned that confidence could sound like truth if delivered loudly enough. He glanced at the jury, then at the gallery, then back at Walter as if the old veteran were an inconvenience on a busy morning. "Mr. Harlan," Pierce said, letting the silence stretch, "this is a courtroom, not a war museum." A few people chuckled. Someone in the back covered a laugh with a cough. Then the sound spread across the room, low at first, then open enough that even the judge had to lift his eyes from the file. Walter did not move. He did not defend himself. He did not look angry. He only lowered his gaze to the leather bag beneath the table and rested one hand on it, as if making sure something inside had not been disturbed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Outside, an American flag snapped in a cold wind coming off the courthouse square. Inside, the air smelled like polished wood, wet coats, and old paper. Clerk Clara Bennett watched from beside the judge's bench, her pen paused above the docket. She had seen nervous defendants before. She had seen angry ones, broken ones, arrogant ones. Walter Harlan was none of those. He was still in a way that felt practiced, the kind of stillness that did not come from fear but from having survived places where panic got men lost. Pierce lifted a photograph from the evidence table and turned it toward the courtroom. It showed a bronze memorial plaque from the Veterans Hall on Route 16, the one Walter had refused to let city workers remove. "This," Pierce said, "is what all the fuss was about." A dirty old plaque scheduled for relocation less than 3 miles away. Another small laugh moved through the gallery. Walter looked at the photograph, and for the first time, something changed in his face. Not anger. Not pride. Recognition. His thumb brushed the handle of the leather bag, where Clara noticed a faded silver emblem pressed into the cracked hide, almost erased by time. A bird. Maybe a raven. Maybe an eagle. Pierce stepped closer. "You disrupted city employees, ignored lawful instructions, and frightened people over a piece of metal on a wall. Why?" Walter raised his eyes. His voice came out quiet, rough, and steady. "Because names are not furniture." The courtroom went still for half a second, just long enough for the words to land. Then Pierce smiled again, because he thought silence meant victory. "Names," he repeated, turning to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Harlan would like us to believe this is about honor." Walter looked back down at the photograph. His hand tightened once on the bag. Clara saw it. The bailiff saw it too. And from somewhere deep in the old leather, a small metal tag shifted with a soft click that sounded far louder than it should have. Pierce did not hear it. He was already reaching for the next piece of evidence, already preparing the joke that would make the whole room laugh again. But Walter Harlan had stopped looking like a defendant. He looked like a man waiting for a door to open. Pierce placed the photograph on the evidence projector, and the bronze plaque filled the screen behind the witness stand. Under the courtroom lights, the names looked larger than they had on the wall of the old Veterans Hall, each one carved in dark letters against metal dulled by 40 years of dust and weather. Walter did not look at the prosecutor. He looked only at the names. Clara Bennett noticed that his breathing had changed, not faster, not weaker, just measured, like a man counting seconds no one else could hear. Pierce tapped the edge of the photograph with one finger. The city did not destroy this plaque, Mr. Harlan. It was being moved to a storage facility before permanent relocation. That facility is only 2.7 miles from the original building. He turned toward the jury with the smooth confidence of a man who trusted numbers more than memory. 2.7 miles. That is what this case is about. An elderly man decided that 2.7 miles was worth blocking public employees, delaying a city project, and forcing police officers to spend their morning calming him down. The word calming brought another soft laugh from the back row. Walter lowered his eyes. His jaw tightened once, then released. The judge, Eleanor Whitcomb, leaned over her bench. She was not unkind, but she was tired, and the docket in front of her was heavy. Mr. Pierce, keep the language precise. Pierce gave a polite nod. Of course, Your Honor. Then he faced Walter again. Mr. Harlan, did you or did you not stand in front of that plaque and refuse to move when city workers asked you to step aside? Walter answered without hesitation. I stood there. Did you raise your voice? No, did you tell them they had no right to touch it? Walter looked at the screen, where the first row of names sat under the glare. Yes. Pierce lifted his eyebrows, as if the confession had been wrapped and handed to him. And what gave you that authority? The room waited. Rain clicked softly against the window glass. Somewhere behind Walter, a chair creaked. He ran his thumb along the leather handle of the old army bag, slow and careful. A promise, he said. Pierce blinked once, then smiled as though he had been given another opening. A promise. To whom? Walter did not answer right away. His gaze moved from one engraved name to the next, stopping near the bottom where the metal had tarnished around a single line. Thomas Keene. Clara watched his face, and for the first time she saw something that looked almost like grief, but older, buried so deep it had become part of his bones. Pierce stepped closer to the witness stand. Mr. Harlan, the court needs facts, not poetry. The judge did not stop him this time. Walter finally looked at Pierce. His eyes were pale blue, clear, and colder than the rain outside. Then read the names right, he said. Pierce glanced back at the screen. I can read, sir. Not if you do not know who they were. A faint murmur passed through the gallery. Pierce's smile thinned. These men were service members listed on a local memorial. That is exactly why the city intended to preserve the plaque. Preserve means remember, Walter said. Storage means forget. Pierce turned away, letting the jury see his impatience. So your position is that a municipal relocation plan became a personal military matter because you did not approve of the storage room. Walter's hand stopped moving on the bag. It became a military matter the moment they put their hands on names they never learned. The bailiff near the door shifted his weight. Deputy Raymond Cole, broad-shouldered and gray at the temples, had been watching quietly since the hearing began. At that sentence, his eyes moved to the bag under Walter's table. He saw the faded emblem Clara had noticed earlier, the almost vanished silver bird pressed into the leather. His posture changed by half an inch. Not enough for the room to notice. Enough for Clara to notice him noticing. Pierce lifted another document. Let us talk about your military record, Mr. Harlan. According to what this court received, you served, you were discharged, and then you lived a quiet civilian life. Nothing here gives you legal authority over public property. Walter looked back at the plaque on the screen. No, he said softly. It would not. Pierce paused. What does that mean? Walter did not answer. He only bent slightly, lifted the old leather bag onto his lap, and rested both hands on it like it held something too heavy for its size. The laughter in the room had faded now, but Pierce did not understand why. He thought he was winning. He thought the old man was shrinking. Clara Bennett knew better. Walter Harlan was not shrinking. He was closing a door inside himself before someone forced it open. Pierce let the silence sit just long enough to make it look like control. Then he lifted Walter Harlan's printed service record between two fingers and gave it a small shake, as if the thin pages were all the man had ever been. "Let us be clear," he said, walking slowly in front of the jury box. "There is no classified badge in this file. No special order giving you authority over city property. No letter from the Pentagon telling Fairmont County to ask your permission before moving a plaque." A few jurors looked down. The gallery stayed quiet now, but Pierce mistook that quiet for attention. Walter sat with the leather bag across his knees, both hands resting on top of it, thumbs still, shoulders squared beneath the old jacket. The rain outside had softened, but the wind pressed against the courthouse windows hard enough to make the glass tremble in its frame. Judge Whitcomb glanced toward the clock above the side door. It was 11:13 in the morning. The room had already been warm from bodies and wet coats, yet Clara Bennett felt a chill move along the bench as Pierce stepped closer to Walter. "You claim this was about respect," Pierce said. "But respect does not excuse ignoring lawful instructions. Respect does not turn a hallway in a veterans hall into your personal battlefield." Deputy Raymond Cole's eyes narrowed from his post by the door. Clara saw his jaw flex once, almost invisible beneath the gray in his beard. Walter did not react to the word battlefield. He looked past Pierce to the photograph still glowing on the screen, where the bronze plaque seemed too bright and too flat, stripped of the wall it had lived on for decades. Pierce lowered his voice, making it sound almost friendly. "Mr. Harlan, did you tell the city crew that those names belonged to you?" Walter blinked slowly. "No, did you tell them they would regret touching it?" "No, did you tell them you were the only man left who had the right to stand there?" Walter's fingers moved then, just once, brushing the brass buckle of the bag. "No," Pierce turned to the jury with a faint shrug. "So we are left with a simple fact. You had no authority." Walter answered. Before the prosecutor could take another step. "Authority is not the same as duty." Pierce stopped. It was not the answer he wanted, but it was the one the room heard. Clara wrote the sentence down without meaning to. "Authority is not the same as duty." The words looked strange in her neat courthouse handwriting, too heavy for the paper. Pierce walked back to the evidence table and picked up another photograph, this one taken inside the Veterans Hall before the plaque had been removed. It showed a narrow hallway with cream-colored walls, a flag in a wooden stand, and the bronze rectangle mounted beside a row of framed unit photos. "This hallway," he said, "was scheduled for renovation. The plaque was to be placed in protective storage for no more than 6 months." Walter looked up. "A name can be lost in 6 minutes." Pierce smiled without warmth. "That sounds dramatic." "It sounds true." The judge shifted in her chair. "Mr. Harlan, please answer only the question asked." "Yes, Your Honor." His voice held respect, not surrender. Pierce seized the moment. "You see, that is the problem. You speak in fragments and memories, but the law requires something solid." He lifted Walter's service record again. "This document says you served from 1969 to 1974. It lists general overseas duty. It lists administrative separation under honorable conditions. It does not list a secret mission. It does not list command authority. It does not list the word hero." The last word landed ugly. The old courtroom seemed to absorb it into the wood. Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably. Walter's eyes dropped to the bag. Clara saw the edge of a small metal tag peeking from a side pocket. It was dark with age, but a few stamped letters caught the light. Raven. She did not know what it meant. Deputy Cole did. His face changed as if an old radio had suddenly caught a signal from a station he thought had gone dead. Pierce did not notice. He was looking at Walter, waiting for the old man to break, to boast, to claim something impossible. Walter did none of that. He simply said, "Some records are written for the public. Some are written for the families. Some are not written at all." Pierce laughed once, short and sharp. Convenient. This time, no one joined him. Walter looked at him fully, and the room felt smaller. "No," Walter said. "It was not convenient." Clara's pen stopped moving. The fluorescent lights hummed. The flag outside struck the pole with a dull metal tap. Pierce turned back to the screen, irritated now, and pointed at the bottom row of the plaque. "Then maybe you can explain why these names matter more than a lawful city order." His finger landed near Thomas Keene. He read it carelessly, stretching the last name into 2 syllables, turning it into something it was not. Walter's hand closed around the handle of the leather bag. Deputy Cole took one quiet step away from the door. Clara looked up. And for the first time since the hearing began, Walter Harlan's voice cut through the courtroom with no tremor at all. "You said his name wrong." Pierce froze with his finger still hovering over the projected name. The courtroom did not move with him. It moved away from him, just a little, the way people lean back from a sound they do not understand. Walter Harlan sat upright now, the old leather bag steady across his knees, his pale eyes fixed on the bronze letters at the bottom of the screen. The rain had nearly stopped outside, but water still slid down the courthouse windows in thin silver lines. Judge Whitcomb looked from Walter to the projection. "Mr. Harlan," she said carefully, "what did you say?" Walter did not look at her. "His name was Keene," he said. "1 syllable. Like rain." The room held its breath. Pierce lowered his hand, annoyed by the shift in attention. "The spelling is right there, Mr. Harlan. The spelling is not the man." That answer moved through the gallery more quietly than a whisper and somehow heavier than one. Clara Bennett felt her fingers tighten around her pen. Deputy Raymond Cole had stopped standing like courthouse security and started standing like a former soldier who had just heard a call sign in a crowded room. Pierce tried to recover with a thin smile. "You expect this court to accept pronunciation as evidence?" Walter looked at him then. "Not hard. Not proud. Just directly. I expect you to show respect when you say the name of a 19-year-old who never made it back to his mother's porch." No one laughed. Not even the people who had wanted to. The photograph of the plaque glowed behind them, bronze and shadow, names stacked in neat rows that suddenly looked less like public property and more like a wall of quiet witnesses. Pierce turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, this is sentimental and irrelevant." Judge Whitcomb did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained on Walter. "Mr. Harlan, how did you know his age?" Walter's thumb moved along the cracked leather handle. "Slow. Once. Twice. He told everyone," Walter said. "First week with us. Said he was 19 and a half, like the half mattered." A faint sound passed through the room, not laughter this time, but recognition of something human. Walter's gaze drifted back to the name. He had a photograph of a yellow house in Ohio folded inside his notebook. He said when he got home, he was going to paint the porch blue because his mother hated blue and he liked to make her argue. Clara stopped writing. The sentence did not feel like testimony. It felt like a door opening onto a place the court had not been built to hold. Pierce's face tightened. These details could have come from anywhere. "No," Walter said. "They came from him." Judge Whitcomb leaned forward, her voice lower now. "Mr. Harlan, were you personally acquainted with Thomas Keene?" Walter looked at the judge. For a moment, the fluorescent lights made his face seem carved from weathered stone. "Yes, Your Honor." "In what capacity?" Walter's hand rested flat on the leather bag. The small metal tag in the side pocket caught the light again. "Raven." Deputy Cole saw it clearly this time, and something like alarm moved across his face before he buried it. Walter answered quietly. "He was under my care." Pierce seized the phrase. "Under your care?" Were you his commanding officer? Walter did not answer. Pierce stepped closer, voice sharpening. That should be simple. Were you his commanding officer? The old man looked down at the bag, and the brass buckle reflected a dull line of light across his knuckles. The record you have will not say that. Then say it yourself. No, Pierce gave the jury a look meant to invite doubt. No, you were not. Walter raised his eyes again. No, I will not use a dead boy to impress a room that laughed at him. The words landed with such quiet force that even the judge looked down for half a second. Clara heard the flag outside strike the pole again, one hollow tap after another. Pierce swallowed, irritated by the loss of rhythm. He turned back to the screen and pointed again, but this time his hand was less steady. Let us stay with facts. The plaque was installed in 1981. You claim these men were yours, yet your public record contains no unit matching this memorial. Walter's voice softened. That was the point. Deputy Cole looked sharply toward Clara. She looked back, unsure why her heartbeat had changed. Pierce blinked. What was the point? Walter did not answer him. He lowered his hand to the side pocket of the leather bag and touched the edge of the metal tag, not pulling it free, only confirming it was there. Some names were carved late, he said. Some were never spoken in uniform. Some families got folded flags and half a story. Judge Whitcomb's expression changed. She was still the judge, still bound to procedure, but the weariness had left her eyes. Mr. Pierce, she said, bring the photograph closer. Pierce hesitated. Your Honor. The bottom row. Enlarge it. The prosecutor returned to the evidence table, his confidence thinning under the silence he had created but could no longer control. The image grew on the screen until Thomas Keene's name filled the wall behind Walter. Scratches marked the bronze around it, old and uneven. Walter stared at the letters. His mouth moved once before sound came out. He sang when he was scared, he said. Badly. A few people lowered their eyes. The statement was gentle, almost warm, and that made it hurt more. Pierce had no joke ready for it. Deputy Cole reached slowly toward the radio clipped near his shoulder, then stopped himself. His eyes were fixed on the faded silver bird pressed into Walter's bag. Clara saw his lips form the word before he made a sound. Raven. Walter heard nothing. He was still looking at the name on the wall, a name the courtroom had treated like evidence, a name he carried like a promise. Then the old metal tag slipped farther from the pocket and fell against the side of the bag with a soft click. This time, the sound reached the deputy, the clerk, and the judge. Pierce turned, irritated. What is in the bag, Mr. Harlan? Walter placed one hand over it. The part of the story your file does not have. Judge Whitcomb held Pierce's question in the air for a moment, then turned her eyes to Walter Harlan. Mr. Harlan, this court is not asking you to surrender anything personal without cause. But if that bag contains material connected to this memorial, I need to know what it is. Walter looked down at the old leather army bag resting across his knees. The brass buckle had gone dull at the edges, polished only where his thumb had touched it over the years. For the first time since the hearing began, his face showed the weight of age. Not weakness. Wait. It contains what was left, he said. Pierce exhaled through his nose, impatient enough for the front row to hear. Your Honor, with respect, this is becoming theater. Deputy Raymond Cole did not move, but his hand settled near the radio at his shoulder. Clara Bennett saw it and felt the room tilt toward something larger than a county hearing. Judge Whitcomb ignored Pierce for once. Mr. Harlan, she said, you may open the bag. Walter's fingers worked the buckle slowly. The click was soft, but every head in the courtroom seemed to turn toward it. The leather flap lifted with a dry creak. Inside was not what Pierce expected. No dramatic stack of medals. No flag. No weapon. No angry letter. Just a small waterproof notebook, its green cover faded almost gray, a folded strip of cloth with a torn patch stitched into it, and a dented medal wrapped in wax paper so old it had yellowed at the corners. Walter placed each item on the defense table as carefully as if he were laying down glass. The courtroom stayed silent. Pierce stepped closer, but not as close as before. "That is your evidence?" he asked. Walter did not answer him. His hand rested over the notebook. Clara could see the patch now. A black field. A silver bird. Not an eagle. A raven, wings half open, almost swallowed by age. Deputy Cole's face lost color. He looked at the bag, then at Walter, then at the plaque on the screen. Something had connected in him that no one else could see. Judge Whitcomb noticed. "Deputy Cole." Cole straightened. "Yes, Your Honor." "Is there a problem?" The deputy swallowed. He had stood through arrests, arguments, storms, and long courthouse mornings without showing much of anything. Now his voice came out quiet. "I am not sure yet, Your Honor." Pierce turned sharply. "You are not sure of what?" Cole looked at the patch again. Whether this hearing just stepped on something it should not have. The room changed. A whisper moved through the gallery and died quickly under the judge's stare. Pierce frowned, annoyed that a bailiff had pulled attention away from him. "That is a piece of cloth." Cole did not look at him. "No, sir. I do not think it is." Walter closed his eyes for 1 second, as if hearing an old door open somewhere far away. Clara looked at the metal tag beside the bag. The stamped letters were clearer now. Raven, 6. Not polished. Not displayed. Hidden for years in a side pocket until the courthouse lights found it. Judge Whitcomb leaned forward. "Mr. Harlan, what does Raven 6 mean?" Walter opened his eyes. It was not supposed to mean anything in a courtroom. Pierce gave a short laugh, but it sounded lonely. "Convenient again." Walter picked up the dented metal but did not unfold the wax paper. He held it in his palm, and his fingers curved around it with a tenderness that made Clara look away for half a second. "This belonged to Thomas Keene," he said. Pierce's expression sharpened. "The same name on the plaque?" "Yes." "And how did it come into your possession?" Walter looked at the enlarged name glowing on the wall. His voice became lower, not weaker. "He asked me to keep it until we got home." No one moved. The phrase was simple. Too simple. It carried no performance, no demand for sympathy, no attempt to impress. That made it worse for everyone who had laughed earlier. Judge Whitcomb's mouth tightened. "Did you return it to his family?" Walter's thumb brushed the wax paper. "His mother was gone by the time I found the address. His brother did not want the visit. Some doors do not open, Your Honor." Clara's pen hovered above the page. The rain outside had stopped completely. Only the wind remained, pushing against the windows, shaking the flagpole with a dull, steady tap. Pierce reached for the notebook. Walter's hand covered it before the prosecutor could touch it. Not fast. Not threatening. Final. Pierce pulled back, offended. "If you present an item to the court, it can be examined. Not by hands that laughed at the names." Judge Whitcomb's eyes shifted to Pierce. For the first time that morning, the young prosecutor looked smaller than his suit. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "step back." He did, reluctantly. Deputy Cole leaned toward Clara, keeping his voice low. "Can you look up an old unit designation?" Clara whispered, "What designation?" His eyes stayed on the patch. "Raven 6. Start with Veterans Affairs. Then ask who still has clearance to answer." Clara's heartbeat climbed. "Clearance?" Cole nodded once, barely. "And do not say it loud." At the defense table, Walter folded his hands again, waiting as if patience were the last uniform he still wore. Pierce tried to regain control by lifting the photograph of the plaque, but his fingers slipped on the corner. The paper bent. The sound cracked through the room. Walter looked up. Deputy Cole moved toward the side door and touched his radio. Clara reached for the courthouse phone. And for the first time since Walter Harlan had walked into that courtroom, the people inside began to understand that the old man was not trying to prove who he was. He was trying to protect who they had been. Clara Bennett kept her voice low when the Veterans Affairs operator answered, but the courtroom had grown so quiet that even the small click of the receiver cord against the desk sounded too loud. Fairmont County Courthouse, she said, eyes fixed on the patch lying on the defense table. I need help identifying an old military designation. Raven 6. The line went silent. Not the ordinary kind of silence, not the pause of someone checking a screen or reaching for a form. This was a silence that arrived all at once, as if the person on the other end had stopped breathing. Clara looked toward Deputy Raymond Cole. He gave her a single nod, his face unreadable now. At the prosecution table, Ethan Pierce pretended not to watch, but his hand rested stiffly on top of his folder. Judge Whitcomb allowed the call because something in the room had shifted beyond procedure. Walter Harlan sat with his hands folded over the old notebook, the dented metal still wrapped in yellowed wax paper beside him. He did not look at Clara. He looked at the enlarged name of Thomas Keene on the screen, and the courthouse lights caught the pale line of an old scar near his temple, almost hidden beneath white hair. "Ma'am," the operator finally said, and Clara heard the voice change from routine to careful. "Can you repeat the designation?" "Raven 6, Clara said. "Possibly connected to Walter Harlan." The second silence was deeper. Then came a chair scraping somewhere far away. "Please hold." The line clicked once. Then twice. Clara pressed the receiver tighter to her ear. Pierce stepped forward. "Your Honor, I object to this informal search being treated as relevant." Judge Whitcomb did not look at him. "Your objection is noted. Stand where you are." Pierce's jaw tightened. Deputy Cole moved closer to the clerk's station, not interfering, just listening like a man who knew the first note of a song he had not heard in 30 years. The call returned with a male voice, this time, older, clipped, official. "This is Mark Ellison, Regional Veterans Records Supervisor. Who is requesting verification?" Clara swallowed. "Clara Bennett, Court Clerk, Fairmont County, Pennsylvania. We are in active session. Is the individual present?" Clara looked at Walter. "Yes, sir." "Full name?" "Walter James Harlan." Papers moved somewhere on the other end. Then nothing. Clara could hear her own heartbeat. Outside the courtroom, a door closed down the hall. Inside, no one spoke. The supervisor came back quieter. "Do not read anything further aloud. I am transferring this call." Clara's fingers tightened around the phone. "To whom?" "Someone authorized to answer." The line clicked again. Pierce looked around the courtroom, realizing too late that he was no longer the center of it. He reached for his file as if paper could restore the order he had lost. "This is absurd," he said, but the words came out smaller than before. Walter turned his eyes toward him for one brief second, not angry, not triumphant, only tired. "It usually is," Walter said. The answer confused Pierce enough to silence him. The next voice on the phone was not regional. It carried the calm weight of command. "This is Colonel Andrew Maddox, United States Army Records Security Liaison. Identify the court and the presiding judge." Clara almost stood up by instinct. "Fairmont County Courthouse. Presiding Judge, Honorable Eleanor Whitcomb." Judge Whitcomb's expression changed when she heard her own name spoken through Clara's receiver. Clara repeated the question the colonel asked, and the judge leaned forward. "This is Judge Whitcomb." "Colonel, this court is attempting to verify whether a military designation connected to Mr. Walter Harlan has bearing on a matter involving a veteran's memorial plaque. The colonel did not answer right away. When he did, every word was measured. Your Honor, is Mr. Harlan being questioned publicly regarding Raven 6? Judge Whitcomb looked at Walter. Walter looked down at the notebook. He is, she said. A slow breath came through the line. Then I recommend you recess immediately and secure the items in his possession without allowing further handling by unauthorized personnel. Pierce's face flushed. Your Honor, that is not an order. The judge covered the receiver with her hand and looked at him over her glasses. Mr. Pierce, one more interruption and I will treat it as contempt. The room tightened. Pierce stepped back. Clara uncovered the receiver. Colonel, can you confirm whether Raven 6 was a unit? Another pause. Not over this line. Deputy Cole closed his eyes for half a second, as if that answer confirmed more than a yes would have. Clara asked, can you confirm Walter Harlan's connection to it? The colonel's voice lowered. I can confirm that if the man in your courtroom is Walter James Harlan, then his public record is incomplete by design. The words moved through the courtroom like cold wind under a door. Judge Whitcomb sat back slowly. Pierce looked at the service record in his hand, the thin pages that had seemed so powerful minutes earlier. They looked useless now. Walter did not move. The colonel continued. A senior officer is being notified. Clara repeated it softly. A senior officer? Yes. How soon? The line went quiet again, then the colonel answered, he is already in the state. Deputy Cole looked toward the main doors. Clara followed his gaze without meaning to. Nothing happened yet. Only the flag outside struck the pole again, steady and hollow. Walter gently folded the wax paper back around Thomas Keene's medal and placed it beside the notebook. His hands were calm, but Clara saw that his eyes had turned distant, as if part of him had left the courtroom and gone back to a hallway where a bronze plaque still hung on the wall. Pierce tried one last time to stand tall. Your Honor, we still have a charge before this court. Judge Whitcomb held the receiver in her hand and looked at the old veteran sitting alone beneath the humming lights. Yes, Mr. Pierce, she said quietly. And for the first time this morning, we may be close to understanding who you charged. The recess did not feel like a recess. No one left their seat. No one opened a phone. No one whispered more than a few words before the silence pressed them back into stillness. Judge Whitcomb remained on the bench, her hand resting beside the receiver as if the black courthouse phone had become evidence itself. Ethan Pierce stood at the prosecution table with Walter Harlan's public service record in front of him, staring at the thin pages as though they had betrayed him. Walter sat alone at the defense table, the leather bag closed again, the faded raven patch and the dented metal placed carefully inside at the judge's request. Deputy Raymond Cole stood near the main doors, no longer relaxed, no longer simply guarding a county courtroom. His feet were set shoulder-width apart, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes trained on the hallway beyond the doors. Clara Bennett watched the clock above the side entrance. 11:26. The second hand moved with a tiny mechanical jump, each tick louder than it had any right to be. Outside, the rain had ended, leaving the windows streaked and gray. A pale strip of sun appeared over the courthouse square, catching the wet flagpole and turning it silver. Then came the sound. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just footsteps in the hallway. Measured. Heavy. Familiar to anyone who had ever heard a formation cross polished floor. Deputy Cole straightened before the doors opened. That was the first thing the room noticed. The second was Walter. The old veteran did not turn around, but his shoulders changed by a fraction, as if his body knew the rhythm before his mind allowed it. The doors opened inward. A man in full dress uniform stepped into the courtroom. He was tall, white-haired, broad through the chest, with 4 stars on his shoulders and a face cut from years of command. General Marcus Whitaker did not announce himself. He did not ask permission. He did not look at the gallery, the jury, the prosecutor, or the cameras from local press sitting unused near the back wall. He simply entered, removed his cap, and walked forward. Every sound in the room seemed to step aside for him. The leather of his shoes struck the floor in slow, clean notes. Deputy Cole came to attention so sharply that several people flinched. Judge Whitcomb rose without thinking, then caught herself, but did not sit back down. Clara stood beside her desk, pen still in her hand. Ethan Pierce's mouth opened as if he wanted to object, but no words came out. Some instincts are older than argument. General Whitaker crossed the center aisle and stopped beside the defense table. Walter remained seated, eyes lowered to the closed bag in front of him. For a long second, neither man spoke. The general looked at the old veteran the way a person looks at a name carved into stone, not with pity, not with surprise, but with the kind of respect that has survived half a lifetime. Then General Whitaker brought his heels together. His right hand rose in a salute so precise, so slow, and so heavy with meaning that the entire courtroom seemed to forget how to breathe. Walter did not return it at first. His fingers rested on the bag. His face stayed still, but Clara saw his eyes shine under the courthouse lights. General Whitaker held the salute. Not for the judge. Not for the flag. Not for the room. For Walter Harlan. The man they had laughed at less than an hour earlier. The man Pierce had treated like an inconvenience. The man whose record had looked empty because the truth had been locked away from people who only knew how to read what was easy. Finally, Walter lifted his right hand. It moved slowly, age in every inch, discipline in every angle. He returned the salute. Deputy Cole lowered his eyes. Judge Whitcomb pressed her lips together. Someone in the gallery began to cry quietly, then covered the sound with one hand. Pierce stood motionless, his face pale now, the service record limp beneath his fingers. General Whitaker lowered his hand first, then spoke for the first time, his voice low and steady. "Raven 6, he said. Walter looked up at him. "General." Whitaker's jaw tightened at the title, as if it did not belong in that direction. "No, sir," he said. "Not from you." The words landed harder than any shout could have. In that instant, the courtroom understood that rank had entered the room, but authority had been sitting at the defense table the entire time. Judge Whitcomb found her voice carefully. "General Whitaker, can this court ask why you are here?" The general turned toward the bench. "Your Honor, I am here because a man under federal protection by history, classification, and simple human decency was made to defend the names of men this country once asked him to bury in silence." The gallery stayed frozen. Walter closed his eyes. Pierce looked down at the plaque photograph still glowing on the screen, and for the first time, he seemed afraid of the names, not because they accused him, but because they had heard him laugh. General Whitaker placed a sealed folder on the judge's bench. The red stripe across the front was bright against the dark wood. "This is the portion you are permitted to see," he said. "The rest will remain sealed." Judge Whitcomb looked at the folder, then at Walter. "Mr. Harlan," she said softly, "is this why you would not explain?" Walter's voice came out quiet. "I gave my word." General Whitaker looked back at him, and the hard command in his face gave way to something older and more painful. "You kept it too long alone." Walter said nothing. He only placed one hand on the leather bag, where Thomas Keene's medal rested inside, wrapped in yellowed paper, waiting beneath the weight of every name on the wall. Judge Whitcomb opened the sealed folder with both hands, slowly, as if the weight of the paper had changed the air around her bench. No one leaned forward, yet everyone seemed closer. The first page was thin, official, stamped with markings that made Ethan Pierce stop breathing through his mouth. The second page held Walter Harlan's name, not as a defendant, not as a confused old man, but as a field commander whose service had been hidden behind language clean enough to erase the cost. Judge Whitcomb read in silence. Her eyes moved once to Walter, then to General Whittaker, then back to the folder. The courtroom waited under the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady tap of the flagpole outside. General Whittaker stood beside the defense table, hands at his sides, face forward. He did not embellish. He did not perform. "Your Honor," he said, "Walter James Harlan led a classified reconnaissance detachment operating under the call sign Raven 6. The men listed on that plaque were attached to, supported by, or protected through that operation. Their families received what the government was permitted to tell them at the time. Not the full story." Pierce stared at the bronze plaque on the screen. Thomas Keene's name sat enlarged behind him like a judgment he could not cross-examine. Judge Whitcomb turned another page. "This says Mr. Harlan remained stateside after discharge for debriefing and restricted testimony." "Yes, Your Honor," Whittaker said. His public record was intentionally reduced. The judge's voice became quieter. "And the memorial plaque?" The general looked at Walter before answering. "It was approved years later as a compromise. No unit designation. No operation name. Just the names. That was all Mr. Harlan asked for." Walter's eyes stayed on the table. His hand rested over the closed leather bag. Pierce forced himself to speak. "Your Honor, none of this changes the charge. Classified history does not give a private citizen the right to obstruct city workers." The words sounded correct. They also sounded small. General Whittaker turned his head toward Pierce for the first time. He did not raise his voice. "Counselor, the city work order you relied on was incomplete." Pierce stiffened. "Incomplete how?" Whittaker removed a second document from inside his uniform folder and handed it to Clara, who carried it to the bench. "That plaque was never ordinary municipal property. It was placed under a preservation agreement between the Veterans Hall, the county, and a federal military heritage office. It could be cleaned. It could be protected. It could not be removed to storage without notification to designated surviving representatives." Judge Whitcomb looked down at the page. "And Mr. Harlan was one of those representatives." "The last one," Whittaker said. The sentence settled over the courtroom like the closing of a heavy door. Pierce looked at his own file again, then at the work order, then at Walter. For the first time all morning, he seemed to understand that the old man had not blocked a renovation. He had stood guard where everyone else had forgotten a guard was still posted. Judge Whitcomb's face tightened, not with anger, but with the discomfort of seeing a legal record turn into a moral one. "Mr. Harlan, why did you not tell the responding officers this?" Walter lifted his eyes. "I did." "What did you say?" "I told them the plaque could not be moved." "Did you explain why?" Walter looked toward the screen, toward the bottom row of names. "I was told for most of my life not to explain why." General Whittaker closed his eyes for a brief second. Clara saw it, and in that tiny break of command, she understood the sentence had hurt him too. Pierce swallowed. The officers reported that Mr. Harlan was agitated. Walter gave the smallest nod. "I was." Judge Whitcomb asked, "Why?" The courtroom became perfectly still. Walter opened the leather bag and took out the wax paper bundle. He unwrapped it halfway, just enough for the dull edge of the dented metal to catch the light. "Because Thomas Keene's name was leaving the wall again," he said. "And I had promised him it would make it home." No one spoke. The local press cameras at the back remained untouched. Even the people who had come only to watch a minor case now sat with their hands folded like they were in church. General Whittaker looked at Pierce. "You read his name wrong." Pierce's face flushed pale and red at once. He glanced at Walter, but apology did not come easily to a man who had spent the morning mistaking dignity for weakness. "Mr. Harlan," he began, then stopped. Walter spared him the burden. "Keene," he said quietly. "One syllable." Pierce nodded once, unable to meet his eyes. Judge Whitcomb closed the folder. The sound was soft, but it ended the morning Pierce thought he controlled. "This court will take a brief moment to review the preservation agreement and the charging documents," she said. Her voice was steady, but changed. "And Mr. Pierce, when we return to the record, I expect the first words from the Commonwealth to reflect what this court now knows." Pierce did not answer. He only looked at the plaque on the screen, where the names seemed no longer carved in bronze, but standing in the room around him. Judge Whitcomb returned to the record with the sealed folder closed beside her hand and the preservation agreement placed on top of the charging file. The courtroom rose when she entered, but this time the movement felt different. Earlier, they had stood because procedure required it. Now they stood because the room had remembered something older than procedure. Walter Harlan remained at the defense table until Clara Bennett softly said his name, and then he rose with care, one hand on the old leather army bag, the other steady against the edge of the chair. General Marcus Whitaker stood beside him, half a step back. That small distance said more than the 4 stars on his shoulders. Judge Whitcomb looked at Ethan Pierce. "Mr. Pierce, you may proceed." The young prosecutor swallowed. His file was open, but he did not look at it. He looked instead at the enlarged photograph of the bronze plaque still on the screen, at Thomas Keene's name, at the scratches around the letters, at all the names he had treated as exhibits. "Your Honor," he said, and his voice no longer carried the bright edge it had before, "the Commonwealth moves to withdraw all charges against Mr. Harlan." The words did not bring applause. They brought stillness. The kind that makes a man hear what he has done. Judge Whitcomb nodded once. Motion granted. She turned to Walter. "Mr. Harlan, on behalf of this court, I regret that this matter reached you in this manner." Walter looked at her with the same calm he had carried through the laughter, the questions, and the silence. "Thank you, Your Honor." Pierce looked at him then, fighting for words that pride had never taught him how to say. "Mr. Harlan," he began, "I was wrong about the plaque." Walter waited. Pierce's eyes moved to the screen. "And I was wrong about the names." Walter gave a slow nod, not forgiving too quickly, not punishing either. "Say his name." Pierce understood. His throat moved once. "Thomas Keene," he said carefully. One syllable. Walter's face did not change, but something in the room eased, as if a small duty had finally been done correctly. General Whitaker reached into his folder and handed another document to Clara, who carried it to the bench. "Your Honor," he said, "the Veterans Hall has been notified. The plaque is already back on the wall. A temporary honor guard is posted until permanent protection is arranged." Walter turned toward him for the first time since the ruling. "Already?" Whitaker's voice softened. "Yes, sir." That word again. "Sir." Spoken by a 4-star general to an old man in a faded jacket. This time no one missed it. Judge Whitcomb closed the case file. "Then this court is adjourned." The gavel came down once, not hard, but final. People began to stand, but no one rushed for the exits. The jury remained still. The gallery remained still. Even Pierce stayed where he was, hands at his sides, eyes lowered. Walter bent to lift his leather bag. General Whitaker reached as if to help, then stopped when Walter's hand closed firmly around the handle. Some burdens could be honored, but not taken. Walter walked toward the aisle. His steps were slow, measured, the worn soles of his shoes moving over the polished floor. Deputy Raymond Cole came to attention by the doors. He did not salute at first. He waited until Walter drew even with him, then raised his hand with quiet precision. Walter paused, returned it, and kept walking. Clara Bennett stood beside her desk with tears in her eyes she did not wipe away. As Walter passed the gallery, one person rose fully. Then another. Then another. No one ordered it. No one announced it. The whole courtroom simply stood for the man it had laughed at that morning. Walter did not look around to receive it. He kept his eyes forward, toward the doors, toward the gray light beyond the courthouse hallway. Outside, the storm had cleared. The flag over Fairmont County Courthouse moved in a clean wind, its colors sharp against the wet sky. General Whitaker followed behind Walter, still half a step back, leaving the old veteran the place he had earned long before anyone in that room knew his name. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, Walter stopped and looked across the square, past the parked cars, past the traffic light swaying over Main Street, toward the direction of the Veterans Hall less than 3 miles away. He held the leather bag close to his side. Inside it, Thomas Keene's dented metal rested in yellowed wax paper, no longer hidden from the world, no longer waiting alone. "I need to see it," Walter said. General Whitaker nodded. "The car is ready, sir." Walter looked at him with tired eyes. "Do not call me that." The general answered quietly, "I have called you that since 1971. I am not stopping now." For the first time that day, Walter almost smiled. Then he stepped into the sunlight breaking over the courthouse square, and behind him the doors closed on a room that would never again mistake silence for weakness. Some salutes last a lifetime.